Good morning and welcome to this meeting of the local review body of the 8th of September 2022. I can confirm that the meeting has been properly called and is quorate. Can I first ask members to appoint a chair for the meeting?
Propose Councillor Thompson as convener.
Howie, second.
Councillor Thompson, thank you.
Thanks very much, members. Good morning and welcome to the meeting of this local review body. This meeting is being live streamed and recorded, and the recording will be made available on the council website for public listening. Remote participants, please follow the good practice guidance, which includes muting microphones and switching off your video when you're not addressing the meeting, writing speak in the Teams chat function when you want to contribute. No material should be posted in the chat function if it's intended as part of the discussion, and the usual standing orders apply, including that any votes will be undertaken by roll call. All members should speak clearly and directly into the microphone when making contributions, and when referring to reports, please provide references to the relevant page and paragraphs to allow everyone to follow. That takes us on to item 2, which is sederant apologies and Chair's approval of members' remote participation. Claire, could you provide the sederant and apologies, please?
Okay, thank you, Chair. 7 members present today, 4 members present on Teams, being Councillors Drysdale, Howie, Jordan and McFarland. The remaining 3, including yourself, and Councillors Ian Crothers and David Slater, are present in the Council Hall.
Thanks, Claire. And also, I confirm my agreement to the participation of those members recorded as participating remotely. Item 3 then is declarations of interest. Do any members have a declaration of interest they wish to make? Councillor Crothers.
Thank you. Just briefly, item number 4, Chair, it's one of my constituents I spoke to him regarding, he gave me a call regarding process. So it's declarable, but I certainly won't be leaving the room. Thank you.
Thanks, Councillor Crothers. Any other?
Councillor Drysdale.
Oh, Councillor Drysdale.
Yeah, good morning, Chair. Good morning, members. I'd like to declare an interest in item number 7, please. That's Sandfield Farm in Castle Douglas. Whilst I don't know the applicant personally, I've been involved in bringing this case to the licence review body today due to the reasons stated on page 361 and 365, Chair. And this is in the report by JF Connolly, the agent. I'll leave the meeting, but please note that I will be listening in on the live streaming. Thank you.
Okay. Thanks, Councillor Drysdale. I should also declare an interest in item 6. That's the one for Springwells Hall St Anne's, in as much as I've been contacted by the applicant, but again, it was advice about process. I think the concern was about when planning and local review body meetings would be happening, because they had because of the election, it had put some delays in the system. But I think it wouldn't preclude me from making a fair, and I've not got a predetermined position on it, so I'll just get that on record. So that takes us on then to, I think, a hand over to you again, Claire, in terms of going through the process.
Yes, thank you, Chair. I can confirm we've got 4 notices of review for consideration today. The first being item 4, Kirkwood House, Dalton, Lockerbie, refusal of planning application for planning permission in principle for erection of dwelling house, installation of septic tank and soakaway formation of access, 21/14/38 PIP. So you have the usual papers in your usual documents in your papers, the notice of review, report and handling, observation of the appointed officer, planning application form, decision notice, relevant extracts from the LDP2, and you've got the photos of the application site and locality. The grounds of refusal are the proposed development fails to meet the criteria set out in Dumfries and Galloway Local Development Plan 2, Policy H3, and associated LDP2 supplementary guidance, which only permits the erection of new dwelling houses in the countryside in a small number of circumstances, none of which have been satisfactorily demonstrated in this instance. Furthermore, the location is not considered to be acceptable as it does not have a presence at the main farm hub, and the application site sits at an elevated position above surrounding dwellings and is considered to be physically and visually separate from within the wider landscape contrary to this policy, and where other more appropriate development opportunities exist within the farm holding. As such, the proposed dwelling at this location would represent unacceptable and unjustified sporadic development in the countryside. The requested method of determination is that would be on the basis of a review of the documents only, with no further procedure. The grounds stated in the notice of review are in summary. The applicant is a working sheep farmer and is retiring and trying to plan for succession. For the next few years, he needs to live on the farm close to the sheep until succession is realised. The business is totally viable. The applicant's son already has ownership of the farm and is now married and has a child and has taken over the main house. The applicant has moved out. It's unreasonable to expect the applicant and partner to live with his son and family. Bids have been made for a house adjoining the farm, but these have been unsuccessful. The applicant therefore considers it is essential that he has a new house to live in. The site was chosen as it is really the only viable one, has road access and close to utilities. Redevelopment buildings within the farm would be economically unviable, and use of holiday cottages would deprive the business of vital income. Policy H3 insists that the farm must be viable, and if refusal of the application would result in loss of income to the farm, which is considered contradictory. The refusal states the site is above surrounding dwellings and no one has objected. Finally, the refusal states that the site is not in the main farm hub, but there is no main farm hub on this farm. The relevant development plan policies are listed on page 16, being also LDP2, OP1, OP2, IN9, and supplementary guidance, design quality and placemaking and housing in the countryside. The main issues for the LRB to consider are: does the proposal comply with the terms of the development plan? In particular, does the proposal meet the terms of LDP2 Policy H3, housing in the countryside, and the associated supplementary guidance? Specifically, has it been demonstrated that it meets requirements for it to be a single house associated with succession planning of a viable farm holding where no building suitable or economically viable for conversion to residential unit on the farm unit? If the proposal is considered acceptable, is the siting of the proposed house appropriate in terms of both its location within the overall farm unit and in the context of an elevated position with an open countryside? If it is not considered that the proposal accords with the terms of the development plan, are there a set of material considerations of sufficient weight to justify a departure from the terms of the development plan? If so, what reasons would members give for such a decision if it were considered the proposal departs from terms of the development plan? If members are minded to not uphold the appointed officer's decision and instead grant planning permission for this proposal, what set of conditions and reasons would members wish to see attached, if any? And if members are instead minded to vary the terms of the appointed officer's decision, what changes to the specific reasoning for the decision would be required? So, having outlined the documents within your papers, it falls to the LRB to determine whether it has sufficient information to consider the review. It's confirmed that no representations from any party will be held today. The LRB has the following options. It can decide it has sufficient information before it to enable it to determine the review today. Request further information in the form of written representations. The LRB would be required to state precisely what information it was seeking and who would provide it. Resolve to hold a hearing, again specifying who would be invited to speak and on what matters. are resolved to hold a site visit accompanied or unaccompanied, and this can be done in conjunction with any of the above, but would obviously not allow a decision to be made today. And if the LRB resolves it has sufficient information and there are no further procedures required, so the LRB has the full powers to uphold, reverse or vary a determination. The decision notice would include a statement of the terms which the planning authority had decided the case reviewed. A planning advisor is present at your meeting today. In this case, it is confirmed that he has not had any involvement in this case. He's not the case officer or the appointed officer for the application. He's purely here to provide independent advice as needed on matters of planning policy, law or process to the local review body. We also have a solicitor present here today who will act independently if the LRB require any specific advice on matters of law. So if members are clear and no further clarifications required, I'll ask the Chair now to leave the debate and in the first instance to lead you through the agenda papers together to decide if you have sufficient information before you to make the determination today.
Thanks very much, Claire. So, members, I think what I'll do is I'll just go through the index of the contents by section, and if there's any questions in relation to the papers themselves or if there's any sort of clarifications needed, then just raise your hands or come in and we can ask the officers to assist. So in terms of the notice of review itself for item 4, which is pages 15 to 21, are we satisfied we've got the information there? This is really to determine whether or not we've got enough information in front of us or whether we need to be able to determine it today. So, so pages 15 to 21, notice of review, are we happy with that, or is there any questions? I don't see any. So, section 2, the report on handling and related correspondence, that's pages 25 to 43. Any questions arising from that? I don't see any hands up. Number 3 is observations of the appointed officer on the applicant's agent's notice of review, pages 47 48. Everybody seems happy with that. And the decision notice, sorry, the plan application form submitted on the 30th of June, plans and supporting information, that's pages 51 to 78. Any questions on that one? Nope. So the decision notice, which was dated 10th of February 2022, that's on page 82, 83. And this part 6 is the relevant extracts from the Dumfries and Galloway Local Development Plan 2, pages 89 to 94. Are we happy we've got all the information we need there? And finally, part 7 is the photos of the application site and the locality, pages 97 to 99. Okay, so I think no questions arising from that as such. So I think effectively we're satisfied that we've got the details in front of us. Questions for clarification haven't arisen from that. So do any members want to come in on this particular item then? So we're effectively in debate about this. Councillor Carruthers.
Thank you, Chair. So I'll just try and summarise if that's okay. I know each local review body works in a different way, and I think this is as good a way to work it as any. I'm just trying to understand a couple of points, if you don't mind, Chair. I'm just going back. Let me just find them. It's in regards to the photographs that outline the dwellings, that there's a number of dwellings on this site, and I think that's fundamental to the decision that's been made previously.
Could you just give us the page number just for members?
Sorry, I'm just trying to find it, Stephen. Give me a second. Give me a wee second. I did have it marked. Get my specs on, that will help.
I think it's page 59 here.
Thank you. It is, I've got it folded.
Oh, right, so I think this will probably assist members rather than sort of the comforting sounds of flicking through papers. But so I think there's a slideshow here, and I gather David Sutty is able to take us through some of this for our assistants. Thank you.
Lovely, thank you.
Morning, Chair. Morning, members. Yes, this is exactly the same photos that you have on page 97 to 99 of your agenda papers. So there's just 5 slides here, all taken from Google Street View. So the first one is a distant view down the B725, looking in a southeasterly direction. So basically the application site is on the hillside just behind the trees in the centre of that slide. Next, please. This is a closer in view. So what you're seeing there is the entry point into the site. So the road, you can see the incline that is going up towards where the house would be, which this is on an elevated piece of land just behind that tree there. And the next slide is taken from the opposite direction. So that tree that you saw in the distant photos, that's it basically there. So the entry point to the site is just the far left-hand corner, just where you see a lower tree in the centre. So the house position would actually be in the sort of elevated position up to the sort of to the right of the centre of that slide there, round about where the tree would be. Next slide is just a focus in on where the entry point to the site would be. So you can see it's an existing access to a field gate. And there is actually another sort of, it took me a while to realise what it was, but there is a sort of route that you can see on the location plan, but there's some hay bales actually blocking it, so it's not an active route. But yes, the road into the site just comes off the main B725. And the last slide is just a view up from the public road looking east. So basically the house would sit along that hill ridge line that you see there, so against the skyline. Thank you, Chair.
Thanks, David. I'll mind and let you in for the next one without going to the determine whether or not we've got sufficient information. So just in terms of the photos there, can I ask members, do we feel we have sufficient information to be able to determine this today in terms of the options available to us? Councillor Crothers.
Thanks, Convener. Chairman, I know this area fairly well, and I'm quite comfortable with having that background knowledge, so I'm comfortable to move on today.
Thank you. And I'd seen Councillor McFarlane's thumbs up on the virtual screens there. I don't see anybody otherwise minded, so on that basis, sorry,
Yes,
Councillor Slater.
There's enough information here today to make a decision. Okay.
Thanks, Councillor Slater. Okay, so Ian, did you want to ask a question about the pictures? You were referring to them earlier, obviously, so on you go.
Thank you, Chair. Just for absolute clarity in my own mind, because on page 59 is, thanks Pauline for that, for outlining, there's a number of different photographs in there, different buildings contained on which I think was originally 3 farms, now 1 farm. And it's just, so I'm absolutely clear, these are all, what's being argued, I think, within this case is that all of these are being used and are part of the viability of the farm. Just so that I don't know if that comes from David or who that comes from. I just want clarity in regards to what that's really outlining. Because when you look on the face of it, you look, well, there's any gods amount of houses there. So there is. And why would somebody not use one of them? But ultimately, I think what's being argued is these are all part of it is like a tourist farm. It's not. It has sheep and such like. It has its. But so there's a lot of tourism and rented. It talks about 2-star accommodation, 5-star accommodation, and so on and so forth. Just for clarity, Chair.
So are you wanting an answer from the officer to sort of basically outline what the significance of these other houses is in terms of this particular review?
Yeah, if that's appropriate, Chair.
Yeah, okay. So David, are you able to assist with that for Councillor Crothers?
Yes, no problem at all, Chair. Actually, I think Councillor Crothers has probably hit the nail on the head. That was actually the page I thought was most relevant to this notice of review, page 59, because it does clearly outline where there's a tension between the appointed officer and the applicant, where the appointed officer has basically said what Councillor Carruthers said there, that, look, there's a whole load of buildings here. Why can they not be used? And that the applicant's response to that is each of those is required for the viability of the farm. So effectively, yes, I would concur that that's the key issue that you would need to address yourselves here is, firstly, has it been demonstrated that there is a need for a new house, an additional house, for the applicant who is a retiring farmer, and there's no buildings suitable or economically viable for conversion within the farm unit? And then the secondary issue is if you concur with the applicant's case that really all of those that you're saying on page 59 are required to make the farm viable, then the secondary issue is the location which has been chosen, which again you can see in red on page 59, is that the most appropriate location? It's well away from what I think there's some debate I noticed in the papers as to whether or not there is a hub for the farm, but certainly I think most people would look at Kirkwood Mains as being the main building, and indeed I notice it's actually a photo of that put on the front page of the applicant's supporting statement, which tends to back up that view that that is the main. So really that's the secondary issue. Is this the most appropriate location given its elevated position? But yes, page 59, absolutely, that's a critical part of your consideration.
Thanks, David. Does that help, Ian?
It does. Thanks so much for that, Chair, and thanks so much for that, David. I'm also going to pick up at page 74, 5.6, where I think it outlines it as well, Chair. The first sentence in particular says the other existing cottages and converted steadings complex on respects on converted steading complex on the estate are part of the farm's diversification into various tourist-related activities and collectively generate an income that makes a significant material contribution to keeping the farm solvent and financially viable. So I suppose, Chair, all I'm really doing is outlining and trying to get a reassurance from a plan advisor. Is that the argument that was being made? I have got some sympathy towards it, but ultimately I'd like to hear what other people are thinking, what the views are. And I think for me, what David's outlined at the end, it's whether this site is in the right location. Succession is what's being is under H3 is being argued for. I think that's clearly demonstrated with information what we've got within our actual report that could be used, and it's viable and sustainable. But ultimately, there's a number of buildings there. Can we actually rule them out if that's the case? And is this the right site? That's the only real question I've got. Other than that, I do think it ticks just about all the boxes. Thank you, Chair.
Okay, thanks, Ian. I've got a couple of other speakers wanting to come in. So, Councillor Jordan.
Thank you, Chair, and good morning, members. I just wanted to draw attention to page 26, paragraph 3.2 B, where it says Blackmark Cottage has been empty for more than 3 years and could accommodate a family if required. I'm not sure if that was still the case, but certainly that property looks as if it has been empty and might still work as accommodation. Thank you.
Thanks, Councillor Jordan. So, I mean, are we aware in terms of the material facts, if that's still the case? Because obviously part of what we're being asked to consider is there actually a need for a new and separate dwelling? So are we aware if the report is still accurate in that regard? David, I don't know if you can assist with that one as well.
Thank you, Chair. Obviously, the local review body is reviewing the information which was before the appointed officer at the time. I'm not aware of any new information other than what came in with the local review body papers, which the only new information which came before yourselves was the fact that the applicant's son has now moved into the main house and is married, got a child, and the applicant has now moved out. That's the only change in position that I'm aware of.
Thank you. Does that assist Councillor Jordan?
Yes, thank you very much. Thank you, Chair.
Thank you. Councillor Drysdale?
Thank you very much, Chair, for letting me in. If we're looking at policy H3, housing in the countryside, The last point there, if it's for a single house within a remote rural area, which is well related to landscape setting, is of an appropriate scale and design and would provide a low carbon house and lifestyle. David, I hope you don't mind me asking, but could you possibly clarify more about the design? I know there is a layout on page 61, but I can't see any further detail on the style of the house. Possibly as councillors and members of this review body, we can click in through and see more detail on the design and layout of the proposed plans. The page before, page 59, we see that 5 out of 7 of the houses on the site are one-storey houses. So I don't know if you're able to give us more clarity as to what is proposed here, or potentially we could do with a bit more detail on that. Thank you very much. Thanks, Chair.
Thanks, Pauline. David, are you able to help Councillor Drysdale?
Yes, just a quick point first is that the LDP2 policy, that issue about the remote areas, those are very specific areas which certainly doesn't apply in this locality here. So really the part of H3 which you're looking at is the third bullet point, which is the single house associated with succession planning of a viable farm holding where there are no buildings suitable or economically viable for conversion to residential use on the farm unit. So I think that the applicant has made it clear that's the route that they're looking at. In terms of the design and layout, this is a planning permission in principle, so all that is being sought is really permission for a house within that red line area. It's entirely at your gift as a committee to put on any restrictions that you consider would be appropriate should you be minded to have a house in that location. And certainly I would strongly suggest if you were minded to support this, you should have given its elevated position, you should have a condition restricting it to being single storey with only accommodation in the roof space as opposed to a full 2-storey house. I would suggest that would be quite dominant in that location. But it is only a planning permission principle at this stage. Further applications will be required.
Thanks.
May I come back in, Stephen?
Yeah, of course. On you go, Pauline.
Sorry, I'm having problems turning this camera on and off today. That's really helpful. I just wanted to put that on record. Thank you very much, David. Thanks, Chair.
Thank you. Yes, and as David pointed out, the original application was planning permission in principle, so the design, etc., if it were to go ahead, obviously you could set conditions around that and it would be assessed against policy anyway. So I've got Councillor Ian Howie to speak.
Thanks, Chair. I wonder if David could help me out here. David, I'm looking at the aerial photograph of Kirkwood Mains. It looks absolutely massive. Have you any idea how many rooms are in this main property?
Thanks, David. So what page is that on, Ian? Just for everybody else. 59?
It's still on page 59. It's the aerial photograph, second down from the left. It's just showing an aerial photograph of Kirkwood Mains. It looks a substantial mansion house.
Chair, sorry, I don't have any details about the exact number of rooms within the property, but I would take members to page 65, which is the front page of the supporting statement which came in, and that does give a photo of Kirkwood Mains house from the front. So just looking at it, you've got 3 if not 4 stories going up into the roof space, so it is quite a substantial property.
Thanks, David. Yeah, Councillor Howie, I think if you can see that picture clearly, it does maybe give a more front-on view as to the extent of the building, if that's helpful.
I think so, Chair. It shows the side one end elevation, but actually looking at, as say, the aerial photograph, it would appear even significantly larger than what you would imagine from that side on elevation.
Okay, fair point.
So
David,
just one thing to remind members: it's not just a house; it's also used as the office for the business. So it's a multi-purpose building.
Thanks, David. Any further questions or comments from members? I mean, I think we're okay. Councillor Crothers.
Just a small one. I'd actually picked up on page 26 as well in regards to It was the representation was one representation. I think it was made late for what I can understand, and it was the Blackmar Cottage has been empty for a number of 3 years or so. But when I looked in, the reason I never brought that up because on that page 59, as it said, it's saying that's being used as a reception and changing room for the Real Farm driving, I think it is. So I just wondered, I suppose, I mean, I think, just for clarity, and it's trying to understand exactly, are we up to date, up to speed? The evidence has been put in front of us, but I think that's for why it may look empty, but it looks like it's part of the viability of the function of the business.
So I'm not sure if that's a question you're aiming at anybody, Ian, but I mean, obviously it's an observation that's perhaps useful.
It is an observation. I just wonder if Mr. City had anything that he's seen in within the actual report itself, information that's there that would, other than that information there. But I think it just, for my own reassurance, Chair, what I'm trying to establish is that the facts, what I'm thinking that is factually correct. I don't know what I'd be making proposals when I could be wrong.
David, is there anything you can maybe help in terms of that additional detail that Councillor Carruthers is maybe looking for?
I can't, I'm afraid. I've only got the same information that you have before yourselves. So if there's been any material change in circumstance, it's not been put forward. We have the information that came from the applicant. They put in the notice of review, which gave a few updates on things, but it hasn't made any reference to Blackmark Cottage in particular, I'm afraid.
Thanks again, David. Councillor McFarlane.
Yeah, thank you, Chair. My understanding is that in order for us to be able to approve this, the applicant has to demonstrate viability of the farm, the ongoing, etc. Now, there's a significant number of properties available to the applicant at this time, and I can't help but think that the removal of one, particularly if it was the Blackmark Cottage, which has been outlined as being appropriate for a family, if alternative could be made to facilitate what that is utilised for currently, that could be made available to the family with the need for further development. Can David give me a sort of an update if I've got that right? Thanks.
Thanks, Andy. So, David, can you help Councillor McFarlane just in terms of what we're doing here?
Yes, Chair, no problem. That is entirely the crux of the argument. The appointed officer was clearly of the view that there were sufficient other alternatives available to the applicant within the overall site, and certainly was of the view that it's not just that there's one holiday cottage which is cross-funding the farm, it's the sheer number that you can see on page 59 that I think was in his mind, that there was really not the justification for accepting a new house, that there were so many other opportunities. But obviously that's the key issue which members need to look at. The subsequent one is that if you are satisfied that there is a need for a further unit, then is this an appropriate site?
Thanks again, David. Okay, I'm not sure if any other members have contributions at the moment, but ultimately, I suppose we're looking at, firstly, is this in accordance, you know, is the decision that's in front of us and the information in front of us, is there a reason to depart from that that's been made? And I suppose it's up to members to determine in terms of the officer's view about the need for an additional house or the case for that being made. Clearly he's of the view that there isn't a sufficient case because there are alternative houses, and even then, as David says, would the location of the proposed house be appropriate? So over to you, members. Councillor Carruthers.
Thank you, Chair. I think you've summed it up well. And as far as that's concerned, my view is that actually the case has been made as the argument, but it's the only doubt I've still got, even after hearing everybody else. I think it's because of the information we've got in front of us, a site visit. I maybe should have retrospectively asked for a site visit, whether we would have got that or not, a different matter, but that would have identified, given me a better understanding of the site, even though I know it fairly well. But actually the site, how elevated it is, that's the bit that's in my mind. How elevated it is from far away from the road, how elevated it is against the hill. And actually, I think the size and the uses of Kirkwood Mains, which is what Councillor Howie's put up. So it's the site and location in particular. I should have really asked for a site visit. I think we're past that point in time. And because I've got that doubt, I think the case has been made, but it's the site location. That's the only reason that I wouldn't actually approve this, Chair. Other than that.
Okay, thanks, Ian. I mean, I've certainly picked up from the comments that have been made that there's maybe a variation of views, because it has been highlighted about the alternative house in the report, and we've got to kind of go with what's in front of us. I think we've established that we've got enough information in front of us to determine this today. So, and you know, if other members have highlighted the other property which was outlined in the original report that could be an, you know, another alternative accommodation. So in terms of establishing whether or not an additional house is required, I think that there is a bit of debate still to be had around that. I don't know if any other members have a view on that, or if we're all of a similar mind that the principle for another house has been established or demonstrated. Again, members, do you have any views on this particular one? Councillor McFarlane.
Yes, clearly we have a family farm, and the situation is such that the farmer's son is currently living at the house. Now that's a situation which is unique to them, I suppose, in that the son has chosen to remain there, and I just can't help but feel that it's a circumstance that is being created rather than one that is evolved. We have a situation whereby the family have decided that they want to remain in the house, notwithstanding what David said about the house being used for office accommodation as well. It does look significantly substantial, and I believe, in my view, is that there is sufficient accommodation available for the family to be accommodated without the need for an additional dwelling at this time. Thanks.
Thanks, Councillor McFarlane. Any other views around this? Because, as I say, it's really at the first point, and before we even look at the siting of a potential development in principle, we need to establish that, well, actually, is there a need for it? Councillor Jordan.
Thank you, Chair. I tend to agree with Councillor McFarlane. I think that there is, in the report, there shows that there is enough accommodation already to accommodate the family. And so I would agree that we should uphold the officer's recommendations. Thank you.
Thanks, Emma. Councillor Jordan. Councillor Slater.
Yes, I have to say I would agree with our colleagues here. There appears to be plenty of accommodation for other parts of the land, the area. That's it.
Thanks, Councillor Slater. So, so there's a sort of a view developing amongst the members of the LRB. I don't know if you want to propose an alternative, Ian, but unless does anybody want to come in terms of are they happy with the view that's emerging, or are they feeling strongly enough that there is actually a need for additional housing? Oh, Pauline, sorry, I didn't see your hand up there.
Sorry, I'm having real problems putting my camera on and off today. Apologies for the delay, everyone. I think probably I'm hearing what we're saying in the room, and my understanding is that with Councillor Carruthers' idea of a site visit, I would have seconded that, but I believe we're too late, so I put my hands up to that. I'm sorry. Page 28, though, everybody, I would like to ask a few more questions, if that's possible, Chair. I see Faris Kirk-McVean, the accountants in Dumfries, had put through a report on the 8th of October 2021, stating out that one of the dwellings rents generates 50% of the entire net revenue of the business, and the state would not be viable without this contribution. With regards to agritourism across Dumfries and Galloway, we know at the moment it's becoming a massive business because farmings are having to diversify so much. So I think we need to bear that in mind when we're making our decision. I don't know if there's an opportunity, Chair and David, for the constituent and the applicant and the agent to come forward at a later date. Sorry, I don't think there is, because it's now gone to LRB, but just with a bit more detail on the breakdown of the farming income. But perhaps we're basing this decision today on the information that's in front of us, so I don't think that's going to be possible. But it's just a point to take on board with regards to the agritourism and diversification of farming at present. Thank you, Chair. Thanks, David.
Thanks, Councillor Drysdale. Just on that same paragraph, as it goes over on page 29, it does highlight that no statement was provided from a solicitor to confirm that a sale of the farm or transfer of ownership was underway. So it's almost like saying, well, there's not enough information has been submitted to satisfy the criteria of the LDP 2. So so it is it's a good point to raise, but I think there is an issue about what information has actually been submitted and what's in front of us today. Councillor McFarlane.
Yeah, thank you, Chair. Just picking up on Councillor Drysdale's comments there on page 28 and running into 29, whilst it does say Kirk and McVean have made that statement, it doesn't actually go on to say who is making the statement that the loss of a property, one of the properties, would have such a devastating consequence. I mean, really, we would need more information in relation to that, but it seems unlikely that the applicant would occupy the property that contributes more than 50% of the net value to the business. Thank you.
Thanks, Councillor McFarlane. Okay, we've got a kind of a view that's forming, but Councillor Crothers.
Thank you. So again, I think the case has been made, Chair, but ultimately the site and design positioning of the actual site, that's about where I've got a bit of ambiguity. And like I say, the size and dominance of the possibility of Kirkwood Mains being raised as an option. I think that would be worth viewing again as well, but anyways, we're past that point in time. But only because of the siting and design, the actual place, its location, sorry, in particular, I wouldn't look to overturn this today. I looked to uphold the original decision, but I think the case is actually made in regards to the succession H3 policy that we have. I do think if we take this as being factual, and there's a couple of points maybe up there that picked up on myself, and I think that needs to be absolutely bottomed out. Okay, these statements, we need to understand they're factual, they're correct, and if they are, I think the case has been well made in regards to the succession. And it is but on the face of it, I think you do reflecting back to page 59, it looks very much that, okay, there's a load of houses here, could just use one of them. But as part of that procedural conversation I spoke about earlier, through the declarable interest, I was made very aware that actually if one of them was to go, the viability of the farm, and actually some long-standing tenants who've been in there for years and years would have to be made, not necessarily homeless, but have to be evicted to make that happen. But that's for a completely different day, not for today, Chairman. So I'm not looking to change the decision at this moment in time. I do think the case has been made in as far as succession, the viability, so on and so forth. So that's my position, Chair. So it'll come to the same conclusion. It is slightly different from what's being proposed elsewhere, but it's the site design location in particular is where I have concerns.
Okay, so just in terms of, because obviously there is that sort of double element to this. So on the one hand, we're trying to determine whether or not there's not a suitable alternative, and therefore that the principle of a new dwelling would be supportable. And then there's the actual location of the dwelling in principle. So there's questions about that, obviously, that you've highlighted there. So you're, in a way, it's like you might end up with the same result, but for different reasons for today. So so in terms of the decision that was made, because this is sort of about the process, effectively could we be in a position, and this is where I'll seek advice, but where we could uphold the decision, but one of the the reasons for why the decision should be upheld are slightly different, and then there might be a future discussion or application comes forward on that basis. Claire, thank you.
Yeah, certainly the LRP have the option to vary the decision, so you can come to ultimately the same conclusion but provide different reasons for that.
Chairman, that was my thoughts. It would be about varying that decision from an LRB. That would be my thoughts, my view, but actually we come to the same conclusion because of the site location. In particular, I don't understand, I've already said that, I'm just repeating myself, but it's its elevation. David has highlighted quite rightly that actually it should be a single story if that's the case, but I would like to have a site visit, seeing exactly how that did fit into the local area.
Okay, thanks, Ian. I think, okay, so it sounds like the mood at the moment is for different reasons perhaps that we would uphold the decision, but it's now about, well, what would the reasons for upholding the decision be? There did seem to be a view emerging that no, actually there wasn't a need to demonstrate for additional housing, and obviously you're of the view that yes there is, but it's actually the site and location that's the issue. So over to members. I mean, I think if it's would we be firm in our view that, unless we want to go to a vote on it, I suppose, that we don't believe that there's reason to vary from the officer's rationale in the case for not having an additional, the case not being made for additional housing in the countryside? Oh, David first, thank you.
Chair, really just to assist with your decision making here. It strikes me from listening to the debate, there's perhaps a divergent view here where you've got some members that I've heard that are minded to uphold the appointed officer's decision. So that would be what you see on page 82 and 83 as it is. The other alternative view is to refuse planning permission, but you're varying the decision such that I would suggest, really from what I've heard Councillor Carruthers say, that it has been accepted that in terms of policy H3, the case has been made for an essential house for the retiring farmer and there's no other alternatives within the farm unit, in which case really the concern follows more, I would suggest, under policy OP2 in terms of the siting and design of the development. So obviously what the applicant would have as that opportunity, if it's refused on a varied ground, is they could come back with a further application for a house elsewhere within the site. But if members are of the view that really there isn't a case being made for a brand new house, then your option is to uphold the original decision of the appointed officer. So it might come down to actually having a motion and an amendment where, from what I've heard, you've got one to uphold what's on page 82, 83, and another one is to amend, to vary the decision. So it's a refusal, I would suggest, on OP2 in terms of siting and design.
No, that's very helpful, David, and I think that captures exactly where we're at. So ultimately, we're going to have to make a decision. So, Councillor Carruthers.
Thanks. No, thanks. That's good advice, and it was the line I would have proposed myself ultimately, because there is a difference of view. I would formally move, Chair, that we, as David just outlined, I think it's to vary the condition, but to refuse on the grounds of OP2. I think it's in regards to site and design and location in particular is where I would emphasise. It's location and going up the hill in particular. But so that's what I would move formally, Chair. Still to refuse, but actually for different reasons.
No, thanks, Ian. That sets the ball rolling. So, are there any other alternatives to that view? Sorry, Pauline, I think you'd wanted in, but I'll let Pauline in first, and then Andy McFarlane, I see your hand up as well.
Yeah, it's just I would like to second that Councillor Carruthers' decision with regards to OP2 recite and design, please, Chair. Thank you. And thanks for the clarification. It does make it a lot easier for us as councillors.
Thanks, Pauline. Councillor McFarlane.
Yeah, I'd like to put forward an amendment that we uphold the officer's decision.
Okay, thanks, Councillor McFarlane. I think, is that Councillor Jordan to speak as well?
Yes.
Thank you very much, Chair. I would like to second the amendment made by Councillor McFarlane, if that's possible, please, to uphold the officer's decision. Thank you.
Thanks, Councillor Jordan. Okay. Over to you, Claire.
Okay, thank you, Chair. We have a motion proposed by Councillor Carruthers, seconded by Councillor Drysdale, to vary the decision of the appointed officer in that the case has been made that it complies with H3, but that it would be refused as it does not meet the provisions of OP2 for siting and design. And the amendment is proposed by Councillor McFarlane, seconded by Councillor Jordan, to uphold the decision of the appointed officer and refuse for the same reasons as outlined in the papers. So going to the vote then, Chair.
Amendment.
Councillor Carruthers.
Motion.
Councillor Drysdale,
Motion.
Councillor Howie,
Amendment.
Councillor Jordan,
Amendment, thank you.
Councillor McFarlane
Amendment.
and Councillor Slater.
Amendment.
Amendment is carried 5 votes to 2.
Thanks, Claire. So that takes us on now to item 5, which is Craigbeck Farm, Moffat, a refusal of application for planning permission in principle for erection of dwelling house 22/006 PIP. Claire, do you want to take us through the papers, please?
Okay, thank you, Chair. Again, you've got your notice of review, report on handling, observation of the appointed officer, comments of the applicant's agent, planning application form, decision notice, relevant extracts from LDP2, and the photos of the application site and locality. The grounds of refusal are, in this case, it has not been satisfactorily demonstrated that a new dwelling house is essential at this location for the operational needs of the agricultural business, and accordingly the proposal is contrary to the policy of the Council as stated in Dumfries and Galloway Council Local Development Plan to Policy H3 and to national policy as set out in Scottish planning policy, which permit the erection of new houses in the countryside only in special circumstances identified in development plans, and none of these circumstances apply in this case. The requested method of determination is that this be dealt with on further written submissions on specific matters. Grounds stated in the notice of review and are in summary. It is considered that the supporting statement and other documents identify an essential need for a dwelling house on the farm. If approved, the applicant will sell his existing house some 10 miles away to fund the new dwelling house, demonstrating his commitment to the farming business. The nature and demands of the business are stated in the labour requirement report and provide support for the application. The statement that the applicant lives in close proximity to the northwest of the site is inaccurate, as he lives some 10 kilometres up from the farm. As this is a livestock farm, the additional points should be special and favourable consideration. The importance of having an experienced person on the farm at all times cannot be overstated. The site is considered to be at greater risk from rural crime, and site supervision would allow swift action in comparison to CCTV. You have the relevant development plan policies being OP1, OP2, H3, IN8, IN9, NE2, HE3, NE13, T2 and supplementary guidance, housing in the countryside and design quality and placemaking. The main issues for the LRB to consider: does the proposal comply with the terms of the development plan? In particular, does the proposal meet the terms of LDP 2 Policy H3, housing in the countryside and associated supplementary guidance? Specifically, has it been demonstrated that it is essential for the needs of agriculture or other business requiring a rural location? And members conclude that proposal is contrary to the terms of LPT 2. Are there any other material considerations which would justify a decision which would represent a departure from the terms of the development plan, and if so, on what grounds would such a decision be made? And the members are minded not to uphold the appointed officer's decision and instead grant planning permission for this proposal. What set of conditions and reasons would members wish to see attached, if any? And the members are instead minded to vary the terms of the appointed officer's decision. What changes to the specific reasoning for the decision would be required? So having outlined the documents within your papers, it's confirmed that no representations heard from any party. You have the same options available to you as outlined for the first item, and again you have a planning advisor present in relation to this case. Again, it is confirmed they have not had any involvement in the case or with the case officer or the appointed officer for the application. They're here purely to provide independent advice as needed on matters of planning policy, law and process of the LRB. And again, you've got your solicitor present who would act independently as required. And so members are clear, and for no further clarification is required, I'll again ask the Chair Now, to lead the debate in the first instance, lead you through the agenda papers together to decide if you have sufficient information before you to make the determination today.
Okay. Thank you, Claire. So once again, we'll go through the index of contents to make sure we've got, well, to determine if we've got enough information in front of us today. So notice of review and related documents, pages 107 to 115. Are we happy we've got enough information there? And then the report on handling and related correspondence, pages 119 to 140. Okay, I think everybody seems happy with that. The third one is observations of the appointed officer on the applicant's agent's notice of review, pages 143 and 144. And the planning application form submitted on the 5th of January 2022, associated plans and supporting information, pages 151 to 183. Are we comfortable with the information there? There's then the decision notice from...
Oh, sorry, Chair, can I come in?
Yes, of course. Sorry, I'm not seeing the hand up. Sorry, Pauline, on you go.
That's okay. Sorry for coming in again. Page 165, this might come later in the presentation from the officer, but could we at some point in the presentation or during the course of the meeting have details as to what C, B, oh, I'm reading it in the wrong order, A, B, C, D, E and F are building wise that is proposed next to this, exists next to this proposed building, just so we have an understanding of how the potential plans would operate and how the farm would be run. It's just quite interesting. And there's maybe something in the report, but I can't seem to find it anywhere. Thanks, Chair.
No, absolutely. And I think, David, I don't know if you're able to assist with that one just now, or if, I don't know if that information is contained in the slides, but if you can help, that would be great. Thank you. Oh, I beg your pardon, it's Andrew speaking to this one, so thanks, Andrew.
Yes, morning, Chair. I'm acting as the independent planning advisor for this item and the next item on the agenda. I can show the photographs of those buildings in the presentation slide that can come up in a moment.
Okay, are you happy with that, Pauline? We'll come back to those in a wee moment.
Perfect. Thank you. Thanks, Andrew. Thanks, Chair.
So we've got the decision notice as dated 16th of March, pages 187, 191. Any comments or questions about that? And then there's the relevant extracts from Dumfries and Galloway Local Development Plan 2, pages 195 to 201. And then finally, there's the photos of the application site and the locality, pages 205 to 208. Okay, I think this is probably a good time then to hand over to yourself, Andrew, and go through the slides and assist Councillor Drysdale question about the numbers or the letters for the buildings. Thank you.
Okay, thank you, Chair. Yes, moving on to the first slide. This shows a photograph of the application site. Just to give you a bit of an idea where this site is actually located, it is located to the east of Moffat, and it's access of local roads leading off the A708, not far from the settlement boundary of Moffat. So this photograph is actually taken on the site, and you can see on the left-hand side of the photograph, it illustrates the proposed site for the dwelling house. And if you move on to the next slide, this is also showing the location of the application site, which is in the middle of the photograph. And if we move on to the next slide, these show the adjoining buildings. So going back to the question from Councillor Drysdale, this photograph is actually looking at the location of buildings A and F on that plan that you referred to before. Moving on to the next slide. This is looking towards the application site. It's actually on the site of the proposed dwelling house, and on the right-hand side you can see the existing farm buildings. And looking at the plan, it's actually the building on the right-hand side, or in the top right-hand corner of the slide, is building C. Moving on to the next slide. This is actually taken from the farm track leading to the site. So this is actually looking south, and you can see the existing farm buildings at the top of the photo, and the application site would be situated to the right of those buildings. Moving on to the next slide. This is another photograph of the existing farm buildings. So this is looking at buildings C and B. Moving on to the next slide. This is the farm access track. The track to the farm actually also forms the Southern Upland Way. So it is a public footpath as well. But this shows you the existing farm track and the Southern Upland Way. The track leads all the way into the Eskdale Forest, actually. But it bypasses, it goes past the farm and then further on into an area of commercial forestry. Moving on to the next slide, this is another photograph of the farm access. And moving on to the next slide, that concludes the presentation.
Thanks, Andrew. Pauline, does that help with your question about the letters and the buildings?
Somewhat. I suppose, to be fair to Andrew, Chair, he probably doesn't know the exact workings of that particular, I would call it a small holding or a medium-sized holding. Yeah, again, it probably goes back to the actual siting. But anyway, we'll get into that later in the debate. Thanks, Chair.
Thanks, Pauline. Okay. So again, do we feel we have enough information with us today to come to a decision? Over to you, members. Councillor McFarlane?
Yeah, thank you, Chair. Just page 183. I don't know if it's just my copy, but the print is illegible. And I wonder if there's a legible copy that could perhaps be read out.
Yeah, thanks, Andy. I think, was this part of an email submission? Was it yourself, Councillor Howie or Councillor McFarlane, just about the legibility of that particular page?
That's correct, Chair. And Mr. Sutty gave a transcript of exactly what it was. I imagine that David should be able to have that to hand if required.
Yeah, no, thank you. David, are you able to assist with that? I did see the email correspondence, but I don't think I have it included in my papers in front of me, which is remiss of me. But are you able to help with that for Councillor McFarlane? I beg your pardon, Andrew. I think it would be for this particular one.
Sorry, I was just switching the camera back on. The copy I have is very difficult to read, I'm afraid. I think it's the animal welfare statement. And in summary, the statement is stating that it's considered that it's putting justification forward for having a house on the site and that it's required for animal welfare purposes. But the letter is, all I can make out is it says this is to confirm that the flock of sheep at Craigbet is well run. However, there are certain, I can't read the rest of it, but I will hand over to Laura, who wishes to speak on this point.
Thanks, Laura. Thanks, Andrew.
Thanks, Andrew. It was just to assist. I have David's email in front of me. So the heading is Reference Planning Application in Principle for a Dwelling House for an Agricultural Worker at Craigbeck, Moffat. This is to confirm that the flock of sheep at Craigbeck is well run. However, there are certain limitations caused by nobody living on the premises. This means that they cannot give 24-hour care when it is most needed during lambing time. Living on site would mean that the sheep could be checked more often, so care can be given quicker and subsequently welfare would be improved.
Thanks for coming to the rescue, Laura. Does that help, Andy? And are members happy with that? Obviously, I think we did get that communication, but unfortunately we don't all seem to have it today in front of us. But with Laura reading it out, does that help members?
Yes, thank you, Chair. It's obviously just to make sure that we're all aware of all the information. Thank you.
Absolutely, thank you. Councillor Slater?
Yes, yeah, I'm quite happy with that, yes.
Okay, thanks for confirming that, thank you. So out with that, is there any other information that we feel we don't have or that we need to have, or are we satisfied that we've got enough in front of us to make a determination today? And some members may see the meeting chat now features the wording in that particular letter from page 183. Laura?
Chair, I just thought it would be worthwhile making the point. Claire had mentioned it in her clerk's notes that the applicant had asked for the review to be dealt with further written submissions, but on looking at the papers in advance of today, I couldn't see what specific matter they were looking to place further written submissions, but I just thought it was worthwhile pointing that out to you.
Thank you. But as you say, I think it's not clear what submissions they would wish to write about.
No, it's simply on their application form. They've ticked that box saying that they would look for further written submissions, but normally when we go down that procedure, we have to be clear on what it is that we're actually looking for further submissions on.
Thanks, Laura, that's helpful. So with that, members, Councillor Carruthers.
Just on that point, so I'm just wondering, because it does say that it's by means of extended response document FS1 in the box below, Laura, which is on starts page 113, I think. Aye, so there's a whole raft of things contained within that, but I struggled with that one as well.
Yeah, so I think, and I'm happy to be corrected, but presumably that would be what they considered to be the additional written submission. Thank you.
Possibly, yes. I mean, that is just the notice of review. It's just a paper apart rather than writing into the application form. Normally when we have written submissions, it is a separate procedure. But if you're quite happy to proceed on that basis, Chair, that's fine.
Thank you. So it's maybe just an interpretation of what that meant, probably. Okay, yeah. So with that, are members happy to proceed? So I think Councillor Howie has indicated that he is, and has Councillor McFarlane, Councillor Slater as well, and Councillor Carruthers. Yeah, great stuff. Thank you. That's enough of a majority, I think. So, okay, over to members. Open to views on this and your thoughts. And obviously, we've got the support from officers here to answer any particular questions that we can't deal with. Councillor Howie.
Thank you, Chair. Actually, I'm sympathetic to this application. I don't believe you can adequately supervise a premises from either if it's 10.5 kilometres or 10 miles away. I think a presence on the site is essential. I note consideration regarding security at this site, as my background was in police crime prevention and security. I used to lecture on the subject at the police college, so I don't agree with the statement at page 124 at 4.12 that CCTV would act as an acceptable deterrent to criminal activity in the site. It's well known that what you actually need is supervision on the site as opposed from remote, with the value of stock, diesel, fertiliser and plant all increasing dramatically. These will be attractive to the criminal fraternity. So on that basis, I say I'm sympathetic to this application being granted. Thank you.
Okay, thanks, Ian. Councillor Drysdale.
Thank you very much, Chair. I just wanted to ask a few questions before I make my points. I noticed that the applicant didn't put in a pre-application, Andrew. And that for me, the siting of this development is slightly skew if it is going to be seen from the track that's the Southern Upland Way. So could I have clarification? If it was sited to the right-hand side of the buildings, to me that would have been a better siting. But of course, that's just a personal viewpoint, and there are probably reasons as to why it wasn't with regards to water access, etc., or being too close to farm buildings. And I do take on Councillor Howie's points in that it means if it's sited where the plans have indicated, therefore the farmer on site can see the sheds more easily. So it was just to find out if the track can be seen, that the people walking the Southern Upland Way would be able to see the new building were it to go ahead. But yes, I do support Councillor Howie's comments in that it's a lot of travelling for this particular farmer, going backwards and forwards. The council had stated earlier this year that we are going to support farming and agritourism and agriculture as much as we can in light of the current crisis that we're facing. So we just found out about the track, if that's okay, Andrew, and also why the applicant possibly, if they put in a pre-app, maybe it would have been cited in a slightly different location, and the reasons as to why or why not. Thank you. I hope that's clear.
Okay, thanks, Pauline. Over to you, Andrew.
Yeah, firstly, I can answer the first question because I have actually walked this section of the Southern Upland Way on an unrelated case recently. So you can see this farmsteading from the track, and you will see a dwelling house from the track. So that, yeah, basically that picture that I showed you, I don't know whether it's possible to go back to the slide, actually, to that photograph. It's the third one, so it's a bit further back. It's that one there, yes. Go back to the previous slide, please. Yeah, that's the one. So yeah, so effectively when you're walking from the, I think it's the C104 classified road, you walk along the Southern Upland Way towards the commercial forestry, and you basically walk straight past the farm. So as you're walking up the Southern Upland Way, which is effectively on your left-hand side of the photograph, you would see the proposed dwelling house. And as you saw from the previous slides, the proposed dwelling is sited on the opposite side of the buildings. So it would be adjacent to the buildings, and any dwelling house would be read alongside those buildings, but it would be slightly more in the foreground as you walk up to the Southern Upland Way. So I hope that answers that query. In respect to the second point of the pre-application inquiry, I'm not aware of the history of the pre-application inquiry. So what it appears from the report is that a pre-application inquiry wasn't sought. So no advice obviously could be given at that stage in terms of siting and design. I would refer you to paragraph 4.16 of the officer's report, which does make some comments on the siting and design, but more in terms of impact on adjoining residents. So whilst no concerns have been raised in the appointed officer's decision, obviously that doesn't, because you have powers to vary any decision, then it doesn't preclude you from making a consideration of that. So I hope that answers your second question.
That's super. Thank you. Thanks, Chair.
Thanks. And just, this is for my own clarity, but the Southern Upland Way on that map which showed the plan of the buildings, that's the one that sort of loops round, if you like. So you have the view of the buildings on your left approaching, and then you would sort of loop round to the left if you were on the site of there's the other access track that goes along by the existing farm buildings is the one on which the new development's proposed.
Yes, so the Southern Upland, the actual sort of the track between where the proposed dwelling house is and where the agricultural buildings are, that doesn't form part of the Southern Upland Way. It is on the loop around. So if we've got the location plan to hand, or it's in your papers, let me just have a look at the plan. It is where it loops around an area of forestry. Yeah, so the best thing on the location plan is effectively where building C is. You will see that the access track loops round in a hairpin. That's the route of the Southern Upland Way. But between where the proposed dwelling house is and building A, that's not part of the Southern Upland Way. That's just part of the track serving the farmsteading.
No, thanks for clarifying that, Andrew. That's helpful. Okay, any other members got any thoughts on this just now? Councillor Slater.
The buildings here, the farm buildings, is there a residential farmhouse nearby? Because it's asking about security. So if there's no residential properties, what's the security like here? Has there been any damage to properties, anything stolen, anything like that? But I would just like to answer if there is a farmhouse and these buildings are close by it, or the farmhouse is remote to that area. Thank you.
Thanks, Councillor Slater. So, in effect, in terms of the status quo at the moment, what do we know about any crime or damage or whatever? And is there a farmhouse actually near to the site as it is? Okay. Andrew, can you help with that?
Yeah, I mean, in terms of on-site submission, the paragraph 4.14 of the Appointed Officers report acknowledges that the applicant has no residential dwellings on site. I mean, there are sporadic houses in the vicinity. Obviously, they don't fall within the applicant's ownership, and it's obviously not very far away from the settlement edge of Moffat. In terms of crime, there's no evidence that's been submitted in terms of what, and that is referred to in the officer's report. So there isn't. I don't have any figures to hand as to what or if there is any crime or there has been any crime experience. So there isn't any evidence in the papers to justify that. It's obviously just a statement that's been put in support by the applicant. Is obviously a concern that they have. So how much weight you give to that is obviously up to yourselves. But there isn't actually any evidence sort of I could see in the papers showing whether there has been any crime in the area or that sort of thing.
Thanks, Andrew. Councillor Slater.
Yes, Chair. Could I ask where the applicant actually lives where the farm buildings are? How far is the farmhouse away from these buildings? That's really the question, really. And one other thing about CCTV. CCTV is very good nowadays, exceptionally good. It can trigger, it can see at night, and it will trigger your phone in the middle of the night. Doesn't matter where you are in the world, it will tell you there's someone there. So CCTV, I'm quite a great believer in CCTV. Thank you, Chair.
Okay, thanks, Councillor Slater. But in terms of just the distance of the actual, I suppose, the farmer's home to the working farm itself, Andrew, are you able to help Councillor Slater?
I can, yes. The applicant it's 2 Newton cottages, which is at the top end of Old Edinburgh Road, leading from Moffat. So it's pretty much at the head of the road. So it's about 5.5 kilometres north of the town centre of Moffat. And just to give you I did do a quick measurement in terms of travel time between the 2 sites. So this is just for your information, but according to Google Maps, to get between the 2 sites where the applicant resides and the application site, it's 18 minutes, and it is 6 miles or 10 kilometres. But the location of the site is on Old Edinburgh Road, about 5.5 kilometres north of Moffat.
Thanks very much. Councillor Slater, does that help?
Yes, thank you very much, Chair.
Okay, thank you. So there's a few different opinions coming up in the chat, but I think Councillor McFarlane, you wanting to come in?
Yes, thank you, Chair. I think what we have to do is take into account the paragraph in page 122, 4.6, where it's outlining the application clearly with unrelated to existing village, no identified small building group, doesn't represent beneficial redevelopment of a brownfield site, etc. Notwithstanding what Councillor Howie has said in relation to security. I'm not unsympathetic to this application. However, there clearly are target hardening opportunities for him if that was his concern. We should be able to actually get the crime stats for that area if need be. But the fact that we're not aware of a high rate of crime would suggest that perhaps it's more a concern than a reality.
Yeah, okay. Thanks, Councillor McFarlane. I mean, yeah, it's certainly not any evidence in front of us, if you like. There's not any detail, as I think we've established, so that it has been highlighted as a concern, but there's no detail to actually support that. Although it does seem to focus mainly around animal welfare and sort of access to the animals, especially during busy times like lambing. So, which obviously it doesn't matter if you've got CCTV or not in a situation like that. So. Okay, Councillor Howie, I'm not sure if you want to come back in. You did indicate a feeling in the chat, so I'm not sure if that's an indication you want to speak.
Maybe just an indication, Chair, as I say, I am experienced in crime prevention. I design CCTV systems. Their effect at preventing crime is 16%. It's actually very low. So from a crime prevention aspect, CCTV is not an answer. With regard to, is it, when do you implement security measures? Do you wait until you've had a theft and then put them in place? That really is bolting the stable door after the horse is bolted. So my views remain the same with this application, Chair.
Okay, thank you. So let's move towards what's in front of us then. And has it been satisfactorily demonstrated then that a new dwelling house is essential at this location? Councillor Howie, you did seem to have some sympathy for this. If I've heard you correctly, I'd like to hear what other members think about this. Thank you.
Chair, do you mind if I come in? Because I did raise my hand earlier, please.
Yeah, sorry, Paul. I think however we're raising hands and getting your name, I keep missing you in the chat, so please come in, yes.
So I quite understand. You're not daft. It was just to say, I think we need to be quite aware. I think Councillor Howie has made these points. I have actually had quite a lot of constituents. Well, not quite a lot. Probably that's an exaggeration. I would say 2. We have had a lot of we have had vehicles being stolen. I know that's not the same area, and they were taken to the north of England. So, you know, that's a consideration. It's not just animal theft and sheep hustling that we're talking about in Dumfries and Galloway. And if you're 20 minutes away, quite frankly, you're possibly too late to deal with the situation by the time you get across there. But anyway, that's by the by. The point I just wanted us to think about was, and it possibly wasn't answered by Andrew. I'm sorry, Andrew, I should have come in earlier. Is there any reason why the location of the building cannot be next to the agricultural buildings? You see a lot of houses and homes, original farms next to the buildings, and that would therefore negate the property being seen as clearly from the Southern Upland Way track. So that was, if I was minded to propose that we go ahead with Councillor Howie, I would just like to know if we could put in conditions to maybe have the applicant apply to put the building on a different site. I don't know whether we can do that or not. So that's just something I would like considered. Thanks for letting me back in, Chair.
Okay, thanks, Councillor Drysdale. Yeah, I mean, I think this brings us back to a similar situation as we were last time for the last one, which is there's 2 things here. One is demonstrating that a new dwelling house is essential if we were minded to do that, and then there's the citing of the planning permission in principle, which is a different thing. So again, it's maybe back to the reasons for refusal in terms of upholding this. And then the reasons for refusal would then maybe indicate to the applicant if they could come back on a different basis to sort of get for planning permission in principle for a different site, if that was what the view of the LRB was. So I don't know if that sort of captured it, but Andrew, maybe you can assist in terms of what we'd be able to do.
Yes, Chair. You certainly couldn't attach a condition requiring the dwelling to be sited on a different site. Any planning permission in principle that you may be minded to grant for this site, you could only site a dwelling house within the application site red line boundary that's identified in the submitted location plan. Now, the red line boundary, just for clarification, is adjacent to the agricultural building. So it's on the opposite side of the small track, but it could be seen to be adjacent to the building. So I wouldn't consider that the dwelling is isolated, but obviously you would have control in terms of roughly where the dwelling would be sited within the red line boundary. You know, it's quite a large red line boundary. So in order to potentially address Councillor Drysdale's concerns, you could stipulate in your conditions that the dwelling house has to be sited towards the northeastern edge, potentially, of the within the red line boundary. That would be closer to the agricultural building. So this is where you have powers to stipulate any particular design and siting features within any of the conditions that form a planning permission in principle, but it must be within the red line boundary that forms the application site. So I don't know whether you want to refer to your papers and looking at the location plan. I mean, it shows a location of the house there, but that is indicative because it is a planning permission in principle. So any future application would have full control over the siting and the design and the external appearance of the dwellings. But as I say, if there's any matters or any design features or siting features that you would wish to state it and stipulate as part of the permission, then that's your chance to do it as part of the planning permission principle.
Okay, thanks very much, Andrew. Pauline, does that help?
Oh my heavens, no. So page 165, Andrew. To me, the red line is opposite, so you really haven't got much space at all to shift. It would just be opposite the farm buildings, end of. Is that correct?
Yes,
okay.
That's correct.
Okay,
yeah.
I shut that off then. Sorry for wasting your time, Chair, and the committees. Thank you.
Okay. Yeah, so Councillor Slater first.
Could I ask, Chair, if is there actually a grid power supply to these buildings or not? Because that's important for any houses that may be built as regarding, electric grids power supply being available, or is it, are they at the buildings already? Thanks.
Thank you. So, Andrew, can you assist in terms of utility connections? I think it might have been in the original plan and permission in principle application, but...
It's not something I'm aware of. Effectively, it's not really something that we check with a planning permission. I mean, it's something that the developer would have to sort of approach the relevant statutory undertaker for, in this case, in sort of getting the power supply to the site. So I'm not aware of what power supply there is to the site at present.
So, Councillor Slater, I'm afraid we don't have that information. But normally in a planning, these were things you would have to address as part of a planning application and development. So, Councillor McFarlane, you've indicated page numbers. I'm not sure if you want to come in on that, and then I'll bring in Councillor Carruthers.
No, I was just trying to assist Pauline, just to look in the papers. Thanks.
Councillor Carruthers.
Thank you, Chair. I did notice there was a telephone mast in the local vicinity, so there's probably a minimum single, I think, but probably 3-phase electrical infrastructure. I'm looking at page 114, and it was that FS one, as was referred to earlier. I'm probably minded that there is probably an essential need, and it's been demonstrated that that essential need is here for this house. I think the distance, the welfare of the animals has been outlined. Security as well. I think security is one issue, but I'm thinking more about the distance. The carbon footprint been referred to earlier, but more so the welfare of the animals as outlined within our report here. I think there probably has been a justification made in regards to the essential need for this house. I haven't got any issues myself personally in regards to the site location, which I think is OP2 had been referred to earlier. So I'm happy enough to support a new dwelling in this location.
Thank you. Any other views from members? Okay, do you want to make a motion of that then, Councillor Carruthers?
Absolutely fine, yep. So I think as for the reasons given, but I think for the distance in particular with his living at the moment. I think it's been demonstrated that it's essential that there needs to be somebody on site for the sake of the welfare of the animals in particular. That's where I'm coming from. But obviously there's security reasons. I do believe the site and location is okay as far as I'm concerned. I would move that, so we uphold, I think it is, the review on those grounds in particular.
Okay, and we'll get to maybe conditions around that if we go forward with that. So we've got, I can see Councillor Howie's got happy to second in the chat. Councillor Howie, you want to speak to that, or?
I don't think there's any real requirement. I think Councillor Crowther summed up.
Okay. Councillor McFarlane.
Yeah, Chair, I don't know if I'm perhaps too late now that it's been proposed and seconded, but I was just going to seek some advice in relation to how relevant the security is, and is it a planning issue, or to what degree it's a planning issue? Thanks.
So Andrew, I don't know if you can assist. It's certainly not been the basis of the actual submission, although it has sort of been mentioned in terms of CCTV, but I think if you can assist Councillor McFarlane. Thank you.
It has to be a material consideration. I suppose really what you have to make sure is you have to be comfortable that you've had the sufficient evidence that that is a genuine concern in this particular application. So because it's been put forward as a supporting argument by the applicant, you do have to consider that. How much weight you give to that is down to you as the decision maker. But the only thing I would say is to make sure that you're making that based on evidence that's in front of you in terms of it, and the same with the welfare as well, that you're satisfied that that is a sufficient justification. Obviously, you've got two opposing views here. You've got the appointed officer whose view is that the farm has been working for a period of time successfully without this, and you've got the contrary view from the applicant as well. It's a material consideration. How much weight you give to that is up to you, but it does have to be based on facts in front of you.
Thanks, Andrew.
Thank you, Andrew.
So, Councillor McFarlane, are you satisfied with that, and are you minded to offer an alternative view from Councillor Howie and Councillor Crowthers, or are you happy to go along with that given what you've just heard?
Yeah, thanks, Chair. Yes, I'm happy with what Andrew said. Based on the evidence I have in front of me, I'd like to put forward a proposal. We go with the officer's decision.
Okay, thank you. Do you have a seconder for that?
I would second it.
Oh,
Chair. I
Councillor
would second it.
Councillor Slater's seconding your amendment.
Yes.
Over to you, Claire.
Okay, thank you, Chair. Giving me. Oh,
Sorry, just to, and I don't know if I should maybe do this now, but in terms of if we are, conditions.
That's what I did. Put my hand up, Chair, for that. I think we'd normally attach a set of conditions around about site and design and access, all these different things. So I would think we've normally got a standard set of conditions. I wouldn't restrict it to single story, depending, but I think that's the planning principle. But as Andrew outlined earlier, all this stuff would come back planning principle, whether it's applying through the reserve matter, so to speak, or the matters reserved in conditions or specified in conditions, or a full application. That level of detail would come back at that point, and again, an officer would go through that with a fine-tooth comb to see if that met. But I think planning principle certainly should be a standard set of conditions attached to that, Chair.
Councillor Howie, are you happy with that?
Yes, Chair.
Okay, Claire.
okay, thank you, Chair. We've got a motion proposed by Councillor Crowther, seconded by Councillor Howie, basically to reverse the decision of the appointed officer and approve this planning permission in principle, as the essential need for a dwelling house has been demonstrated, and so it now complies with policy H3 due to the requirements for the welfare of the animals and the security, and this would be subject to standard planning conditions. We have an amendment proposed by Councillor McFarlane, seconded by Councillor Slater, to uphold the decision of the appointed officer and refuse for the same reasons as set out in the papers. So, going to the vote then, Chair.
Amendment.
Councillor Crullers,
Motion.
Councillor Drysdale,
Motion.
Councillor Howie,
Motion.
Councillor Jordan,
Motion.
Councillor McFarlane,
Amendment.
and Councillor Slater.
Amendment.
Okay, motion's carried, 4 votes to 3. Thank you.
Thanks, members. Thank you, Claire. So that takes us on to item 6, which is Springwells Hall, St Anne's, Lockerbie, refusal of planning permission for erection of dwelling house with integral garage and roof-mounted solar panels, 21 1980 FUL. So, Claire, if you could take us through the papers as outlined.
Okay, thank you, Chair. We've got your notice of review, report and handling, observations of the appointed officer, the planning application form, decision notice, relevant extracts of LDP 2, and again your photos of the application site and locality. The grounds of refusal are the proposal is contrary to policy H3 of Dumfries and Galloway Council Local Development Plan 2 and the accompanying supplementary guidance on housing in the countryside, in that development of the site would not remove dereliction or result in a significant environmental improvement and therefore would not involve the beneficial redevelopment of a brownfield site. Local Development Plan 2 Policy H3 and National Policy as set out in Scottish Planning Policy SPP permit the erection of new houses in the countryside only in special circumstances identified in development plans, and none of these circumstances apply in this case. The proposed development fails to meet the requirements of Dumfries and Galloway Local Development Plan 2 Policy OB2 Design Quality and Placemaking and the associated supplementary guidance, and that it would not be sympathetic to local built forms, maintain or enhance the local character or identity of the area or respect the important physical, historical and landscape features of the site and its vicinity, such that the development would not integrate well into the landscape setting or contribute positively to the existing built and natural environment, a sense place or local distinctiveness. And 3, in the absence of a BAT survey, the mitigation plan where necessary, there is insufficient information available in order to allow a proper assessment of the impacts of the proposed development on protected species and determine whether the requirements of Dumfries and Galloway Local Development Plan 2 Policy NE5 would be met. The requested method of determination is that it would be dealt with by means of a site inspection, and the grounds stated in the notice of review are in summary. The black finish of the proposed dwelling house would be recessive against the green foliage and it would absorb more heat than lighter coloured walls, helping the thermal efficiency of the building, especially in winter. There are many examples of traditional black facade buildings throughout Scotland. Springwells Hall is a redundant used building, thus meeting the definition of a brownfield site in the Scottish Government SPP. It is a matter of the planning officer's opinion that the building is suitable for conversion rather than basing it on the facts presented. The structural survey concluded that the work is required to convert the building would be significant, making viability questionable. The amount of works required to convert the building and meet building regulations, roof and floor replaced, walls stripped back to original timbers, would in fact be a new building, and the planning officers appear not to have understood this. They reject the comment on paragraph 411 of the delegated report that the intention would appear to be for a dominant landmark. It would be recessive against vegetation and the main house would be at a lower level than the existing building. Paragraph 4.12 of the delegated report questions the removal of 4 mature trees to the south. A tree survey would have been provided if sought. It's proposed to retain all mature trees along the boundaries. Had the species been sought, the application would have been withdrawn until a survey could be carried out. No energy statement has provided, but one not required at the time of submission. Policy OP2 seems intended for housing developments rather than single houses, and concern expressed about the length of time it took to reach a decision. We have the relevant development plan policies listed: OP1, OP2, H3, IN8, IN9, NE5 and CF1, and supplementary guidance, housing in the countryside and design quality and place making and tree and the development. So the main issues for the LRB to consider: does the proposal comply with the terms of the development plan? In particular, does the proposal meet the terms of LDP policy H3, housing in the countryside and associated supplementary guidance? Specifically, would redevelopment of the site remove dereliction or result in significant environmental improvement and therefore meet the beneficial redevelopment of a brownfield site? Does the proposal comply with terms of the development plan? In particular, does the proposal meet the terms of LDP2 policy, OP2 design quality and placemaking and associated supplementary guidance? Specifically, would it be sympathetic to local bulk forms, maintain or enhance local character or identity of the area, or respect the important physical, historical and landscape features of the site and its vicinity, such that the development would integrate well into the landscape setting or contribute positively to the existing built and natural environment, a sense of place or local distinctiveness? Are the panel prepared to accept the late submission of a BAT survey, which was not before the appointed officer, and if so, are its conclusions acceptable in terms of the Council Local Development Plan 2 Policy NE5 Species of International Importance? And members conclude that the policy is contrary to the terms of LPP2. Are there any other material considerations which would justify a decision which would represent a departure from the terms of the development plan? And if so, on what grounds would such a decision be made? And the members are minded not to uphold the appointed officer's decision and instead grant planning permission for this proposal, what set of conditions and reasons would members wish to see attached, if any? And if members is then minded to vary the terms of the appointed officer's decision, what changes to the reasoning would the decision be required? So again, I've outlined your papers. It now falls to the LRB to determine whether you have sufficient information to consider the review. Again, it's confirmed there's no representations from any party today. Again, you have the same options as outlined at the first item, and again, you have a planning advisor present at your meeting for this case. Again, it's confirmed he's not had any involvement in this case and was not the case officer appointed to the application. Again, here, purely right independent advice as required, and again, you've got your solicitor present who will act independently as required. So if members are clear, again, I'll ask the chair to lead the debate and in the first instance lead you through the agenda papers to decide if you have sufficient information before you to make the determination today.
Thanks again, Claire. So we'll just go through the papers. We've got the notice of review, pages 215 to 266, and the related documents there. Any questions or clarifications or for officers there? Okay, so the 2 is report on handling and related correspondence, pages 269 to 288. Are we comfortable we've got enough information there? Okay, and then there's the observations of the appointed officer on the applicant's agent's notice of review, page 291 to 294. So I'm just, maybe take this now, but obviously there's late documents which we're going to be asked to consider whether or not to accept them as part of this in terms of the notice of review, particularly relating to BAT surveys and other things. So we'll get to that in a wee minute, but we'll just go through this list, but just to put that in members' minds. So there's the planning application form submitted on 24th of September 2021 and associated plans, pages 297 to 321. Members happy with that. And then we've got the decision from Dumfries and Galloway Council dated 13th of April, pages 325 to 330. So no questions there at the moment. So, and then there's the relevant extracts from Dumfries and Galloway Local Development Plan 2, pages 333 to 339 in section 6. And then there's the photos of the application site and the locality, pages 343 to 352. I'm wondering, before we get to the additional information, if there's a slideshow of photographs to go with this, if we can maybe see that now just to illustrate. Andrew, is it still you for this one?
It is, Chair, yes. That's it, right. Okay, so yeah, the application site, it's situated on the southern side of the U98A road near the junction with the B7020, and it's located approximately 1.5 kilometres west of Johnston Bridge. So moving on to the next slide. This is looking southwest towards the application site from the U98A road. Moving on to the next slide. This is taken just slightly further to the west, looking at the front of the site. Moving on to the next slide. This is taken in the southeastern corner of the site, looking towards the application site. It shows the original hall, modern extension, and a detached store. Moving on to the next slide. This is looking towards the application site on the C98 road when you approach from the west. Moving on to the next slide. This is looking east towards the application site from the B720 road. Moving on to the next slide. This is looking in a northeasterly direction from the B7020 road. Moving on to the next slide. And this is looking southeast towards the application site. And the next slide, which is the final slide, this is looking east from the C98A road. And in the middle of the slide, it's that's the B720 road that runs north to south towards Lochmaben to the south and Moffat to the north. So that's all of the slides with the presentation.
Thanks, Andrew. Any questions from members at the moment on that? Councillor Slater.
Yes, Chair. It says there's two questions really. There's late documents. Are they included as regarding discussion today, or because they're late, they won't be discussed? The second one is appears to be a bat colony there. And maybe could do with more information of that, whether they're disturbed or what actually happens to the bats, because that's quite an important environmental issue. Thank you, Chair.
Thanks, Councillor Slater. Yeah, so it was just Claire had indicated to me there, but at page 231 onwards, there's late submissions, which includes some slides from the developer, giving more sort of picture information about the actual proposed development, and also there's a BAT survey as well, which you'll, well, I can't remember the page number off the top of my head, but so 231 onwards has those submissions, and then I think it's page 249, yes, which is the BAT and Barn Owl survey report. So I suppose we have to determine whether or not we're happy to accept those in terms of what we're considering today. Are members minded to do so? Yeah, I'm getting nods in the room. I don't see any alternative views at the moment. I think that's. I've got a thumbs up there, so that's good. Okay, so I think we're basically saying we'll accept the late submissions, but the question then remains is what happens to the bats, I suppose, was the question you were asking, Councillor Slater. Andrew, I don't know if you can help with that, obviously, given the report that's been submitted.
I can, Chair, yes. I've actually looked at the Bat and Barn Owl survey, and it does acknowledge that there is a bat roost in the building. So the the applicant will have to, if the application is to be approved today, would have to obtain a bat licence from Nature Scott, but the council has its own obligations that it has to meet under the habitats regulations, and I'd be happy to advise further on that depending on how the discussion of the application goes. There's certain tests that the council needs to meet, and also the fact that there'd be a need to condition any mitigation measures. But as I say, I'll be happy to advise further on that, depending on how the discussion goes in terms of what you're minded to do with this application.
Thank you. Councillor Slater, does that help answer your question?
Yes, thank you very much, Chair.
Thank you. Okay, so I think that's all the papers in front of us. We've seen the slides. Over to members. Any thoughts on this one? Councillor Carruthers.
I think we've been asked for a site visit. I know this site fairly well. Had an RTA at the crossroads just at Springwells Farm there last summer. I think it would be worth a site visit, this one in particular, because of this case. I'd like to see we've got the extra information in regards to the Barton Barn survey. It'd be good to see whether this does merit being demolished. I think to physically see it on site would help me make my mind up in regards to that. I'm not going into the merits of the case thereafter, but I mean, I think it would be relevant to have a site visit on this one.
Thank you. Yeah, so I suppose ultimately we're determining whether or not we've got enough in front of us today, and you're proposing that we have a site visit as the applicant has asked for. Councillor Slater?
I would actually second that.
Okay. Anyone, I mean, that's procedural, so anyone, or do we need to specify what it is we're looking for in the site visit? I'm not sure if this is quite the same as planning, but would we be in session as such? Claire, I don't know if you can assist.
Again, it should be for the purposes of the paperwork for this, the reasoning for your site visit, as you were outlining, and then specifying whether your site visit would be accompanied or unaccompanied. Most site visits are accompanied, whereby the LRB would meet together with your planning advisor present, and you can invite whoever else would be relevant to attend or not.
Okay, so would you be proposing an accompanied or an accompanied site visit?
Accompanied from somebody who could advise. That might even be the fact that the applicant or the applicant's agent, whoever they may well want to come as well, or be beneficial. Maybe that's up for discussion, Chairman. Reasons wise, I'd like to see the state condition of the building, actually see it physically, how far, what disrepair it actually is in. I'd like to see that state of disrepair. Like I said, I know this area very well. In my recollection, going by it since the early to mid 1980s, it was always a derelict building. It was Johnson Bridges Village Hall, as you're probably well aware. They've got a new building now, which is redundant as far as that community use is involved, is my understanding. But I would have thought it nearly fell to the ground by now, never mind being demolished. So it's ultimately for me state of repair, and actually any evidence in regards to the volume of bats that may well be there. That's the 2 points I would like to see.
Thank you. I'm just noticing in the chat, and again, apologies, it seems to be just yourself, Pauline, but I've missed the fact that you maybe had an indication to speak before Councillor Slater, so my apologies if I've missed you again. But I see that do you want to come in actually and speak to your comment?
Yeah, thanks, Chair. It was just to say I absolutely support and would like to second Councillor Carruthers' point for a site visit, please. And I did indicate that I wanted to speak before Councillor Slater came in. So I don't know if I'm able to second that or if you're going to put his seconding as noted. So I'll leave that one up to yourself and governance. But thank you. And I know you're not seeing my notes to speak, so I know it's difficult for you. I understand. Thanks.
Well, I'll appeal to the gentlemanly nature of Councillor Slater. Pauline's made the point that she'd actually asked to speak to second Councillor Carruthers' proposal for a site visit. Are you happy for her to be recorded as such? And then we'll go to the vote, or it's up to yourself.
No, I've no problem with that.
Okay, then can we accept that Councillor Drystall's the seconder to the motion, but obviously Councillor Slater's indicated his support for that as well. Are there any other anybody otherwise minded? I think we've obviously there's more members in the local review body might have a different view. Councillor McFarlane.
Yeah, it seems I'm being a bit contrary today. Having looked at the drawings, having read the reports, it appears to me that the hall is in such a state of disrepair that economic refurbishment isn't really a question. Councillor Carruthers has said that he thought it was already derelict. I can't really see it that it's going to take us a great deal further forward. I'm not really sure that there would be a great deal of benefit based on that visit, other than what we've seen in the photos and the reports and such like. I'd be happy to try and deal with it today if we could. Thanks.
Okay, so well, there's a motion on the table, so it's been seconded. Do you want to put forward an alternative view? Or sorry, Councillor Carruthers, quickly.
Sorry, Chairman, so just for Councillor McFarlane's information, it's as much so, I understand, I've seen it in the last year, so I understand its state of repair, but like I said, it looked dilapidated to me last time I'd seen it, but because we've had further submissions and information in regards to the Barton Owl survey, for me, I feel it needs to be verified with a physical site visit as well in regards to the size of the colony, roost, whatever language you want to use. There may be evidence there that would allow us to fully consider the information extra information that's been put in front of us today.
Thank you. So there's a motion that's been seconded on the table, as it were. Councillor McFarlane, do you have I accept you've got a different view there, but do you want to make an amendment of it, or what?
No, thanks, Chair. If the consensus is a site visit, then I'll happily go along.
Thank you. That's not to say somebody else might not be otherwise minded. So does anybody else have another view, or are we happy to agree a site visit, an accompanied site visit for this one? I'll take silence as consent for a site. Oh, sorry. Laura, I beg your pardon.
Thank you, Chair. It was before we move on to the next matter. It was just to point out we have been making reference to this BAT survey and also the 3D mock-ups, but there hasn't been a formal decision to accept them as new material under section 43B.
Apologies. I thought we'd done that, but I've maybe done it a bit clumsily. So I've got nodding heads to the left of me and a
my
shaking
apologies.
head.
Thank you.
So yeah. So to be fair, Claire had made a reference to it, so I'd kind of maybe clumsily done that. So but thank you for clarifying that we've done that and kept keeping us right. So I think we're agreeing to an accompanied site visit. I can't see an amendment to your motion. So Councillor Carruthers.
I'm comfortable. Chairman, accompanied means obviously we need our own advisor there, whoever that may be, or might be more than one from the council officials. And I do think the applicant or agent probably needs to be get that option, at least if they want to be in sight, then that would be there. Maybe allow us to. I'm thinking in particular probably the applicant agent, but is it Tony Lightly? I think the name is of the report author of the BAT survey. Thank you.
Well, if we can make the appropriate arrangements to allow that opportunity, I think the key thing is that we can go there accompanied by one of our officers, and then obviously that we can have the proper type of discussion and examination on the day. So is that okay for you, Claire? Are we happy to record that as such?
Okay, thank you, Chair. Can confirm then that the LRB are basically adjourning this item to allow for the further procedure of an accompanied site visit. You've agreed that the invite should be extended to the agent applicant and also the author of the BAT survey. The same membership of the LRB would reconvene following that site visit. That's my phone. Aim for the election.
Councillor Carruthers.
Thank you, Chair. Through my own experience, I know historically I thought it was like a planned application committee, so if you didn't turn up to the site visit, you could then take part in the further decision making. But I think for absolute clarity, my understanding is that if you don't turn up for the site visit, you can't take part in the further decision making, and maybe that needs clarified because it is important that everybody's there.
Yeah, for absolute clarity, the members. you'll be unable to continue in the determination of the local review case unless you'd attended the site visit. And apologies, there's been an accident here with my daughter.
I think with that clarification, members, maybe we should take a short comfort break, perhaps for half an hour. Is that okay? Can we reconvene at 5 to 1, if that's okay? Thank you. Thank you. Thanks very much, members. Welcome back to Local Review Body, Thursday 8th of September. So this is to take us on to item 7 now, which is Sandfield Farm, Ayr Road, Castle Douglas, non-determination of planning application for erection of dwelling house and installation of septic tank, alterations to access on to A713, the Ayr Road, 220047, full. Claire, if I could ask you to take us through the papers as outlined, thank you.
Thank you, Chair. We've got the notice of review, the observation of the appointed officer, the observations of the applicant's agent, plan and application form, relevant extracts from the Dumfries and Galloway Local Development Plan 2, photos of the application site and locality. The recommended grounds of refusal, they're on page 3, one of your papers. It has not been satisfactorily demonstrated that a new dwelling house is essential at this location for the operational needs of an agricultural or other rural business, and accordingly the proposal is contrary to the policy of the Council as stated in the Local Development Plan 2, Policy H3, Housing in the Countryside and associated supplementary guidance, and to national policy as set out in Scottish planning policy, which permit the erection of new houses in the countryside only in special circumstances identified in development plans, and none of these circumstances apply in this case. The requested method of determination that be on the assessment of the review documents only with no further procedure, and the grounds stated in the notice of review are in summary. A notice of review against non-determination has been submitted as a decision is sought on this planning application, as the case officers have had nearly 5 months to make a decision or ask for an extension of time and have failed to do so. The planning application was refused by a case officer who it is considered failed to observe the business viability report correctly and split the sheep between the 2 farms owned by the applicant, something that never happens. The stock figures are increasing in line with the business report, with 200 sheep currently resident at Sandfield. The new build house would be a green building using as many renewable energy products as possible. The relevant development plan policies OP1, OP2, H3, IN9, T2, ET11 and supplementary guidance, housing in the countryside, design quality and placemaking, dark sky park friendly lighting, developer contributions on sustainability, reducing carbon emissions in buildings. The main issues for the local review body to consider are: does the proposal comply with the terms of the development plan? In particular, does the proposal meet the terms of LDP 2 Policy H3, Housing in the Countryside and associated supplementary guidance? Specifically, has it been demonstrated that it is essential for the needs of agriculture or other business requiring a rural location? Is the proposed dwelling house essential for the proper functioning of the farm business at Sandfield, or would it relate to the need of a full-time farm worker or one who is mainly involved in agriculture, either based on the current operation or any proposed expansion? The members conclude the proposal is contrary to the terms of LDP2. Are there any other material considerations which would justify a decision which would represent a departure from the terms of the development plan? If so, what grounds would such a decision be made? And members are minded not to uphold the appointed officer's decision and instead grant planning permission for the proposal. What set of conditions and reasons would members wish to see attached, if any? And members are minded to vary the terms of the appointed officer's recommended decision. What changes to specific reasoning for the decision would be required? So, having outlined the documents within the papers, it now falls to the LRB to determine if we have sufficient information to consider the review. It's confirmed again that no representations from any party held today. The options available to the LRB are again the same as outlined right at the start of this meeting, but it's been a little while, so I'll remind everybody that you decide you have sufficient information before to enable you to determine the review today. Request further information in form of written representations. The LRB would be required to state precisely the information it was seeking and who would provide it. Resolve to hold a hearing, again specifying who would be invited to speak and on what matters. Resolve to hold a site visit accompanied or unaccompanied. It can be done in conjunction with any of the above, but we're not allowed a decision to be made today. And if the local review body resolves it has sufficient information and no further procedure is required, then the local review body has the full powers to uphold, reverse or vary a determination. The decision notice would include a statement of the terms in which the planning authority had decided the case reviewed. You've got a planning advisor present for this case. It's confirmed he has not had any involvement in this case. It's not the case officer or the appointed officer for this application. He's here purely to provide independent advice as needed on matters of planning, policy, law, or process to the LRB. Again, you've got a solicitor present today who will act independently if the LRB require any specific advice on matters of law. So members are clear, and again, for the clarification, there's a crowd that asks the Chair now to lead the debate, and in the first instance, lead you through the agenda papers together to decide if you have sufficient information before you to make the determination today.
Thanks very much, Claire. So I think if we just go back to the index of contents, just to make sure that we're happy we've got enough in front of us to make the determination if need be. So part one is a notice of review and related documents. That's pages 359 to 368. Councillor Howie.
Thank you, Chair. It's relevant to the statement setting out reason for review, page 356, submitted by the applicant. It's to do within the second paragraph. Information. The case officer then proceeded to assist with the current application, guiding my clients with advice that she said would mean approval being issued. Can we get confirmation that that is the state of play, and that is the planning officer's view that she actually made that statement to the applicants? I would like clarification on that, please.
Yeah, thanks, Councillor Howe. Which page number was that again? I was just trying to find that in the papers there.
The upside down 365. It's actually upside down again.
Yes, thanks for that. I did notice it was upside down at the time. Yes, are we able to get a bit of explanation to this claim here? Andrew, are you speaking to this, or is it David? Okay, back to David.
I'm unable to comment on that, unfortunately, because the original case officer for the application that was refused, which is not the one before you, has subsequently left employment of the council. So any verbal statements that were made or any emails that may have been sent, I haven't been party to.
Thanks, David. So, Councillor House, so it doesn't actually relate to the current application. I think that's what David's saying, but does that help clarify your question or answer your question? Yes, Chair, it helps clarify, but I do have concerns that if people are seeking the assistance from planning officers, they're then given that assistance, indicating that their application would be successful, and then to find out it's subsequently refused. I do have concerns on that basis. Yeah, no, noting that. So I think even if you get the right advice, it still relies on the right type of application being submitted. So there is sometimes it can it doesn't always tally with the advice that's been given, but that's not what that statement says. So any other observations on that particular part in terms of the papers or the index of contents? So if we move on to observation of the applicant's agents on the appointed officer's comments, page 401 to 404. Yeah, Ian.
Sorry, Chair. Because Councillor Howard went back a few pages, I thought we were still at that point. It's a report of handling. Is that where we were then? Is that what you're looking at? I'm on page 371. I'll tell you, I've never come across this before. So what it's saying is notice of review. I take it's a form of report of handling. It's a deemed refusal, non-determination of plan permission, and it goes on in regards to this case in Ayr Road, Castle Douglas. It's retrospective, I think, isn't it? It's almost like a report of handling, but retrospective. I just want clarity because I think there's been an application or whatever it is for a non-determination. They've waited beyond a certain amount of time and said, okay, we've had enough, we're not waiting any longer. And then the LRB at that point becomes a decision-making body in which where the decision would be made. But I think that is a retrospective to the non-determination time. And it just the legalities of that, I've never come across it. Thanks, Chair.
Yeah, so no, it's a fair enough point, and I think because this is unusual in the sense that we don't normally see this type of thing at the LRB, so I'm just wondering if we maybe get a bit of assistance for the members present, just in terms of where we're at with this, because it's to do with non-determination rather than something that's been determined and then appealed or reviewed. So Laura's indicating she wants to speak, and I think David's appeared online as well. So Laura first.
Okay. Thank you. Yes, under the legislation, there is a period of time within which a delegated decision has to be made, and if that's not met, then the person has an opportunity to ask for a review, even though there's not been a decision made, but it's treated as if it's a deemed refusal. And to assist the local review body, a report's prepared and presented to you so that you have the full information. But David can presumably add about the report.
Thank you. David?
Yes, all of what Laura said is absolutely correct. Basically, that no decision was issued on this application within the statutory 2-month period, within a 5-month period of it being lodged and made valid. After that 2-month period, there's a 3-month window in which the applicant can actually put in a notice of review on grounds of non-determination. Just so members are clear, that period expires on the 27th of September. So if the LRB hasn't made a decision by then, the applicant has a right to go to the Scottish Ministers. It's the one and only occasion where you can have a situation of a local review body decision going up to the Scottish Ministers. So basically, in these situations, to assist basically the local review body in its determination, what you have starting on page 171 is what would have been the delegated report effectively by the case officer, and then some comments on the additional grounds which have been submitted. These are very rare. I can only think of maybe 2 most cases which have come before yourselves in the past. The critical thing to stress on this is that you are actually the first and the final decision maker on this. So no decision has been issued by officers. They could have allowed the application to proceed, and then officers actually made a delegated decision which would have been a decision before yourselves that they could have taken on an actual refusal, but no refusal has been issued. It's purely a deemed refusal. In other words, it's gone over the statutory time period in which a decision can be made. So from page 171 onwards is what would have been the officer's report, and it's really just an assemblage of the information to allow you to make a safe and competent decision today. But to answer Councillor Carruthers' point, yes, it is entirely legal and proper that you've got that before you. It's really to assist in making that decision because you are the first decision maker. Exactly the same way as you would have a recommendation report before you at the Planning Applications Committee when you were the first decision maker then.
Thanks. So just if I understand you correctly before I let Councillor Carruthers back in, but so by initiating that process in terms of the local review, there's a deemed refusal, but then the actual report that the officers produced is also recommending refusal. So there's a kind of two strands to that. So Councillor Carruthers, did you want to come back to that?
Just every day's a learning day, Chair. Thanks for that. No, a good explanation by both. Thank you.
Thank you. So that takes us then on, I think, I'm sort of lost track of where I am, but observations from the applicant's agent on the appointed officer's comments, page 401 to 404. Are we content with that? So no hands up at the moment. And then the planning application form as submitted on 19th January 2022, associated plans and supporting information, pages 407 to 434. We then have the relevant extracts from Dumfries and Galloway Council Local Development Plan 2, pages 437 to 442. And then there's photos of the application site and the locality, pages 445 and 447. Now, in this case, do we have a presentation in terms of the photographs? I can see a slide up on the screen. Is there anything you want to talk us through, David?
Yes, Chair, thank you for bringing me in. Yes, there's just a few slides, basically the ones you have on page 145 onwards. So this is a distant view looking up the A713, and you can see the cluster of buildings which are on site already. Where the proposed house is really sitting at the left-hand side of the group of buildings. There are 2 existing residential properties at the frontage which are not in the ownership or control of the applicant. So the next slide just goes in that a little bit closer. So again, you're seeing the house which is not in the control of the applicant, sitting there with a caravan. The site that you're considering today sits to the rear of that house. And the next slide just shows the entry point, which would come in via one of the cottages. So you would go through that existing entry and then turn left and then right again to get to where the application site is. There's a number of buildings that would be demolished to put the house in place. And so the next slide is taken from the other side. So you're looking south now towards the application site, so you can get a better view of the existing buildings. This time on the right-hand side, you would have one of the buildings demolished in a local shed as well. And the final slide really is just a zoomed-in photo. So it's showing the lambing shed would remain, but then one of the other buildings would be removed. If you need details of exactly what that is, then the plans are on page 419, 421 of your agenda papers. Thank you, Chair.
Thanks, David. Any comments from members on what we've seen so far? Okay, so I suppose that takes us to what we've got to consider then, which is does the proposal comply with the development plan? So obviously it's been recommended for refuse in terms of it being in front of us. So this is a kind of like, as David said, almost like a planning application for the first time. If there's no further questions from members to the officers present, then I suppose we're effectively in debate, or in fact, no, we're not. Do we feel we've got enough information in front of us to determine this today? So I've got a thumbs up from Ian and Councillor Slater in the room. I've got Emma and Andy with thumbs up there as well. I think that constitutes a majority. So okay, so we've got. Oh, I beg your pardon, Councillor Howie.
Thank you, Chair. Just before we lose David, it was just if we were so minded to grant this application today, I note that the applicant has a haulage business. I couldn't see anything in the papers which would prevent the new yard being used as a haulage yard for his business and his HGV. Is that something we could put a condition on to prevent?
Thanks, Councillor Howie. David, can you assist with that? I think that's a different authority that would perhaps grant that, but maybe you can assist.
Yeah, probably the simplest thing to say is, although the justification for the house has been made on an agricultural basis, and it's a little bit of shifting sands, as I'm sure you'll have noticed in the papers, where there's differing figures as the thing has gone on about the number of sheep which are there. If you granted permission, there's no conditions or legal agreement which is now attached to the house, so it would be an unrestricted house. Certainly, if it was being operated as a commercial entity, and there was you'd need an operator's license. The traffic commissioner issues those things for that to actually have that. But it would raise questions in my mind as to whether it was a mixed use that was actually being proposed, because what is here it's purely a dwelling house and it would be for domestic purposes only. If a haulage yard was really being operated from the site, that's probably something slightly different.
Thanks, David. Councillor Howie, does that answer your question?
Yes, thanks.
Thank you. So with that, I think we're sort of establishing that we have got enough information in front of us to determine today. So, members, what's your view in this particular case? Is there sufficient reason to challenge the fact that the officer's recommendation is for refusal? Councillor McFarlane.
Yes, thank you, Chair. It seems to me that a lot of the application is based on the future and how they intend to extend their agricultural activities and such like. My understanding is, though, that we should be making this decision based on the here and now and the evidence in front of us. Whilst I noticed that there has been a slight increase in the number of sheep and I think calves, you know, based on what we have just now, I think that I would be minded that there isn't sufficient evidence to justify it, and that I would tend to support the officer's decision. Thanks.
Thanks, Councillor McFarlane. I'll let other members come in before we get to any particular recommendation or motions or amendments or whatever. So, Councillor Slater.
I would quite agree with Mr. Farley said. I don't think there's enough. I think I would support the officer's decision.
Thanks, Councillor Slater. Councillor Howie, is that you indicating you want to speak again?
Yes, please, Chair. I suppose what comes down a lot to is that Council Policy H3 Housing in the Countryside and definitions clearly states that the requirement is for the need for a full-time worker or one who is mainly employed in agriculture. So perhaps if that could be teased out a little for me.
Yeah, so I mean, obviously there's been submissions as part of this notice of review, which I suppose either do or don't make the case for that, and it's maybe down to interpretation or how much that's what the assessment of those business cases are, if you like. So again, if you're putting that question to David, I'll ask David if he can come and maybe assist just with that specific aspect about whether or not it's just a worker who's involved in agriculture as opposed to one whose full-time role would be in that.
Thank you, Chair. Just going back to the actual wording of your Local Development Plan 2 Policy H3, the wording is that one of the criteria is that it is essential for the needs of agriculture or other business requiring a rural location. So it doesn't actually use the words that the applicant has, the agent has put in. The wording there is, it is essential for the needs of agriculture or other business relating to a rural location. So for argument's sake, there could be some activity which is taking place that's not agricultural, but it's clearly being demonstrated that there is a need for that house in that location. But that's all it says, the needs of agriculture.
Thanks, David. I don't know if that helps, Councillor Howie, or if you've got any thoughts on that.
No, that helps, thanks.
So any other? So we've got two members have indicated that they're. It's not quite a motion, but I've not heard a sort of contrary view other than sort of teasing out some further discussion. Councillor Howie.
Okay. Sorry, there's a bit of reverb coming back there. As I say, I'm quite sympathetic to this application going forward. It's on a site surrounded by dwellings. Anyway, it's back from the road. It's not going to be visually intrusive. So, as I say, I'm quite sympathetic to this going forward. Thank you.
Okay, thanks, Councillor Howe. And I suppose we'll have to get to a point where if we do get to a decision that allows that, there'd have to be thought given to conditions that would be associated with that as required. So, okay, so we've got a couple of alternate views there. Does anybody want to take the step and make a motion? Put a motion on the table? Councillor Crothers.
It's not so much a motion, it's more a question at this moment in time. It's in regards to the labour unions. Think in H3, you think of small building groups, the different reasons why, the material plan reasons why you would just justify a house like this. But from what I can read within the report, unless I've missed something, there's a whole raft of conditions there, I think, with the internal amendment, page 385, could be applied. But it's the amount of labour units, it's just over half a labour unit is what I'm reading. Is that correct? Because the reason I'm asking that, Chair, when somebody comes in is, that, I mean, that's where the crux of it lies for me. If it was a full labour unit or plus, no, it does talk about, so the intended uses goes beyond that. They've got to expand the farm, and that's, I think, was maybe mentioned earlier. But if the farm expands and gets to that size, then you probably would justify a full labour unit. But at this moment in time, it looks like it only justifies about half a labour unit.
Yes, thanks. I'll maybe pass over to Dave. I think it does seem in the officer's report anyway that it doesn't necessitate a full-time worker. So, David, I don't know if you want to maybe help with that one, just to clarify that.
As I mentioned earlier, there is an element of shifting of sands here. The officer has considered it on the basis of the information which was before herself at the time. But you'll notice that there's a subsequent, basically when that is compiled, there's a 14-day period in which the applicant can then make comments. And we did receive further comments which are in your papers. But the basis on which the recommendation for refusal is really on page 379 of your agenda in paragraph 417, where that come down to those officers do not consider that a labour requirement of around 0.5 units would meet the requirement of one who is mainly involved in agriculture. So I suppose another thing, just to throw in a little hand grenade, that I don't actually think that the officer has made an awful lot of mention about. There is part in the report I did notice, but it's to do with whether or not you would have an acceptable level of residential amenity, because you've got a house effectively directly behind another house. There are buildings there, quite accept what Councillor Howie said there, that there's a grouping of buildings which are in there, many of which would be demolished to actually allow that. But it's whether or not it's particularly appropriate under policy OP1 to actually have another house sitting immediately behind another one. I have my doubts about that, and you'll note that there are objections from the people who do live there on that basis.
Thanks, David. Councillor Crothers, does that help sort of clarify the 0.5 worker units?
It does. There was mention, I think, elsewhere in the report that it's just 0.3% away from it, and that's the point I was probably trying to tease out. Was there somewhere else within the report that where it was where a suitably qualified person had given information that we could consider that justified up to just short of 1%, or a full-time worker, I should say. So, but I mean, if that's, I'm reading it the way David's read it out there. I did think, as far as amenity is concerned, when you see the site location plan, the way the house has been laid out, it was too close to buildings for me. The backland development, so to speak, that's not an issue really from my perspective, but the lack of amenity, I would have said, it is an issue for me. I think a better proposal in site location and amenity could be considered at a later point in time, is my view. But no, Chair, I think I'm comfortable enough at that.
Thank you. Yeah, and just in terms of, normally we wouldn't see applications that had 3 objections, for example, unless it was a statutory objector. So that's sort of novel in the sense of determining this for the first time, if you like. But in there, while David did mention about OP1 in terms of the building layout, for example, that's not actually included in the original reasons for refusal in terms of the officer's report. So, but it's maybe something that we ought to consider in terms of any weight that we might or might not want to give to that, depending on what decision we make today. So, okay. Any other speakers or anybody want to put anything forward to bring this to a conclusion? Councillor Slater.
Just one point. It said that it's an agricultural business. So could that area become more agricultural, more equipment in the premises. So although there's a house there, it could become an agricultural unit with a lot more equipment, as I said. And it looks, if the road is, it looks quite a fast piece of road that as well in that area. But that's just my question anyway. Thank you very much, Chair.
Yes, thanks, Councillor Slater. I mean, I think David's already alluded to, and I'll invite him to come back in just to speak to that. But there does seem to be this shifting sands, as you said, between you know what this might or might not be. But David, do you want to maybe add comment to that for Councillor Slater?
Yes, if it helps, Councillor Slater, I would draw your attention to page 419 and 421 of your agenda papers, because that does show that it already is an agricultural holding, where there's a number of livestock sheds, lambing shed, hay shed, machinery shed, stables. They're already there, and as you move to page 421, you see a number of them will actually be removed to actually put on the proposed house. Obviously, there are deemed agricultural permitted developments for agricultural buildings. So if it were to expand, then it might be the case that a further application comes forward for more sheds. But in fact, this particular application results in a number of buildings being demolished to accommodate the house rather than increasing it at this particular stage. I think as well, probably I should point out in fairness to the applicant to answer Councillor Carruthers' question is that late in the day, but just before the agenda was published, we did receive the comments on page 401 to 404, where again the agent has stated what the current situation is. So on page 403, there are now approximately 200 sheep on the holding. I wasn't clear if that meant the holding as in this particular one together with the other land holding we have at Bellymac, or whether this is at the particular farm. As I said, so there's lots of different numbers that you find in there, and I don't pity you trying to get your head around them, because I've struggled with that myself.
Thanks, David. And just on the point about the road, I mean, the roads officer was consulted as a matter of course, but brought no objections and did observe the A713 public road. But his concern, I think, was more about appropriate access and visibility to the actual entrance to the site. So, yeah, does that answer your questions, David Slater, that is?
Yes, thank you, David, for your explanation there, and thank you, Chair.
Thank you. Councillor Jordan.
Thank you, Chair. Just in response to David, just a moment ago, he said that there was a comment about 200 sheep being on the holding, and on page 365, the upside down page, there is a reference to 200 sheep resident at Sandfield, which is dated the 25th of March 2022. Thank you.
Thanks, Emma. Councillor Howie.
Thank you, Chair. Just as you were asking to sum things up, I realise it's becoming apparent I'm in a minority of one on this particular case, so I don't believe there's any value in pushing it to a vote.
Okay, thanks, Ian. We weren't quite there yet, I think, but I mean, I think we're sort of drifting towards what's in front of us in terms of the original recommendations from the officer in the report. Is anyone otherwise minded, or are we happy to uphold the original decision?
Happy to uphold.
Thanks, Emma. Councillor Carruthers?
Thank you.
Sorry, Chair. Can I just, for making a decision, you're not upholding any decision?
Yes, I knew you were going to pull me up on that, but yes. Sorry, Councillor Carruthers.
Just so I'm clear in my own mind, so I've looked at the further information that's been referred to, taken on board what Councillor Howie just said here as well, but there's nothing in here from a professionally qualified person that says there's a full-time labour unit required, is there? Just so I'm clear.
Okay, so David, can you assist with Councillor Crowther's specific question about a professional person setting out the number of labour units?
There's a whole load of different information which has come in at different stages. So, for example, when the application was submitted, it was just saying about 90 sheep. Even on the applicant's agent's own words on page 404, we would also take the opportunity to mention the additional information, explaining the additional enterprises would take the holding up to 0.97 labour unit and increase the profitability. So, again, that's still not tripped the normal threshold that you'd look for at least one labour unit to justify a house on the site.
Councillor Crowthers?
Oh, thank you, David. It's 4.18 on page 404. That's the bit I was probably trying to tease out as much as anything, where it does refer to 0.97 of a labour unit. It is slightly short. We could have rounded it up quite simply, but I think it's so close to that point in time. It looks like it anyways. It's probably merits a further application at a different moment in time. Chair, so I'm not looking to make any different, but I think the decision would be there's a report of handling or notice of review. The report of handling, I think, states it should be refused. I would agree that at this time it should be refused.
Thanks, Ian. Councillor McFarlane.
Ian, this Chair, thank you. Just to say that I think David sums it up with the shifting sands comment. It appears that there's been an attempt to muddy the waters and try and create a bit of confusion in relation to the numbers. There is a comment about it's unusual to split the livestock between, two properties, which is the situation that we have here. But clearly, the livestock can be moved from one field to another, and whilst they could move them all onto this site and claim a justification for it, the whole thing has been taken as a whole. And at this time, I don't believe that it fulfills the criteria that was set out. Thank you.
Okay, thank you for that. So I think, we're certainly moving towards agreeing with the officer's recommendations, which is to refuse. Are we happy with the reasons for that? Given the discussion that we've had, it's only really the only reason given. Is in terms of housing in the countryside, policy H3. So and that it's not been demonstrated a new dwelling house is essential. So are we happy on that ground alone to agree with the recommendations?
Happy, Chair.
Okay, thank you. I'm getting a couple of nodding heads in the room and thumbs up from Emma. I think Ian's conceded that he might go that way as well, and I'm happy to agree that. So if we're happy with that, let's agree with the original recommendations to refuse and conclude business there. Although what I do need to say as well is the next item, I can't sort of say there's no other business because there is other business, which is the continuation of item 6. So we've recorded that as a accompanied site visit, and we'll get the dates for that sorted out and invite the relevant people in due course. So I think that's everything. Thanks very much, everybody. Thanks for your time today. Appreciate your patience. Thank you.
Thank you, Chair.
Thanks, Chair.